Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're gonna talk about SAP Logon pad. How do you log into SAP, and just quick walkthrough around what SAP screen looks like and what is SAP T code. So let's begin. So for SAP to log in, for end user or anybody to log into SAP, there is a GUI client called SAP Logon or SAP GUI, which is a graphical user interface that's called SAP Logon. So you would see that client or software installed on your machine. So either you can type on the run and search, or if you have a shortcut on your desktop, you can just double click on that. So let me just do that. So it should open up. Yeah, you can see this opening up. It should open up that screen, right? So this is where you would see all SAP systems. Suppose you work for a company, a customer, or whatever it is, right? So you would see all the different SAP systems here. And when I say SAP, is the traditional SAP, which is based out of ABAP T code, right? Or ABAP programming, to be precise. You will not see a Java system. You will not see the new cloud-based system. So this is again about a standard ABAP-based system. So as you can see, I have a system here called India Campus Guru, and if I double click, it would give me a logon screen, right? So you can see here there is a client, then there is a user, there is a password field, and then there is a logon language, right? So the client here, I think I didn't cover the client. So client is more like suppose you have a big house, right? And you would have like a multiple rooms, right? So each room kind of have its own whatever, it's kind of a container. So client is more like within the same system you can have a multiple clients, and each client's data and all the configuration would be different. There is something called cross client or workbench, like any development objects, like building a new T code or a standard. Those are cross client objects. So if you change in one client, it is going to reflect in all the clients you have. But anything which is like configuration and security roles or user ID, they are client specific, right? So for a normal SAP environment, probably you would have more clients in your sandbox, in your dev system, because you would be doing some development, you would be testing in a different client. Like, so you wanna keep all the config into your golden master, and then you would have a separate client in dev for doing a unit testing. Same with sandbox, you may have multiple clients for different purposes. For production and for quality, probably you will have only one client. So again, it depends on how your project, your client, and those things are set up. Also, sometime even production, also a company may have a different clients based on if they have a different entity, right? Suppose I'm a company A, I may have different client for company A in US versus company A in India, right? So I may create a separate client just to bifurcate and segregate the access, the roles, the data, and everything. Like, you want to have a separate because those two entities are separate. Maybe they want to have their own container or the client. So that is a client, to be, I would say, on very layman term. Like, client is more like creating your own space which you want to have control based on whatever you are doing. So for in this case, we only have 001, which is a default client, and I'm just gonna log in here. This is our test system anyway, right? So as you saw, I used my ID and password to log in, right? You may have single sign-on in your landscape. So I think the moment you double click on your SAP Logon pad and that system, it may just log you in, provided you have your ID in the SAP system, and then you kind of also, you are still a valid user account, so that the SSO is working. The SSO probably would be with your AD or credentials or whatever identity provider you have in your company in your project, right? So as you see, I'm logged in, and then you see here and this tab here, like this is like a little bit kind of a text tab where you can type anything, then you can just click on this green tick or enter. So this is where the SAP T code, as I talked about, SAP T code is like a shortcut for running an actual transaction. Like suppose I'm trying to create a user ID, I'm trying to create a role, or if I'm a business user, maybe I'm trying to create a purchase order or trying to create a vendor, or whatever I'm trying to do, right? So SAP kind of gives you a unique kind of abbreviation or code. They call it T code or transaction code for everything you would be doing here. So everything somebody would be doing in SAP, the traditional system would have a corresponding T code, because you cannot remember the actual program name and run. This is like a 30 character long program name, right? So to make your life easy, there is a T code for everything. So suppose I'm gonna create a user ID, so I will type SU01, and either you can just click on this green tick or just hit enter. As you can see, when I typed SU01 and I hit enter, it opens up the user maintenance screen, right? So yeah, this is where, as a security user admin or security admin, or the whatever I think I would say initial journey of your SAP security you are in, like you would be running in this T code quite often, because that's like the first thing you would do when you start your journey in SAP security. So as you can see, there's a user field here, and then you have create option, you have change, you have display, you can delete user IDs, you can copy one into another one, you can lock and unlock, and then you can reset their or change their password, right? So this is the user admin T code and the screen. Again, the T code is SU01. You should know that for sure if you're trying to be come into this field and even try to give an interview there, right? So yeah, and then okay, I'm trying to create a user ID called something like test1, right? So you will type that user ID here, you will click create, and then there are different fields. As you can see, there are different fields here, like documentation. Maybe your company mandate you have to maintain some kind of a description and details of okay, who this user is or whatever. I think this field, I would say, is not heavily used and maintained, but if your policies or standards says you have to, then probably you're gonna add something here as per whatever ask it is, right? But this is where I would say you have to maintain, like there are some mandatory fields here. So last name is mandatory, and you should wanna maybe maintain the first name too, right? So maybe I can just set as user. And then as you can see, there are languages, there are other fields and department, room number, if you have such thing like which building code, etc. There contact details like telephone number, extension, mobile phone. If these are the mandatory fields and if you have to maintain them, probably you can, but these are not mandatory fields, at least from SAP perspective. Email, I would say, yeah, there's something we should always maintain, because that's used for a lot of things. But yeah, this is the email field. I can just simply say that's it, or email here, right? Okay, and then if I go to the next tab, there is a logon data here, and then you see Alias, which is used for some purposes like business partner and other things. So again, if you have that, probably you would be assigning an alias. Like suppose the alias for user is different than the user ID, so maybe you want to maintain whatever alias they use, or just simply test one here, right? User type, I have a video on user type. So these are the user type you would have. Dialog is the actual end user, like someone like a real human, where somebody would be logging into the SAP system with their ID and password. So these are the, I would say, the users SAP charges you and they ask you to pay fee. So suppose you have 100 users, you would be asked to pay for 100 dialog users. So they are like active named users, and SAP strictly say you should not be sharing any dialog user ID and password, right? So it should be 1-to-1. So if you have 100 employees and they all need SAP access, there should be a dialog user type in the SAP system, right? So this is like as per SAP licensing contract. And most of the users should be dialog in your system, because yeah, they are real human beings, right? And then SAP again charges based on how many dialog users you have. Again, talking about dialog user, it needs ID and password, or if you have single sign-on, again, it cannot be shared. And it also kind of follows the password standard you have. Suppose you have password set, like you have to change your password every 180 days or 90 days, whatever it is, and then you would be prompted to change the password unless you have single sign-on, right? And yeah, I think you would be counted as a licensed user as well. And then the next one is system type. This is a user type which is used for all the non-named user, like any RFC user, any interface. And so system user, nobody can actually use system user ID and password to log in as we just logged in via SAP Logon pad. They can only be used for RFCs, for connections, for interfaces, and most of the time SAP don't include them in their licensing audit. So they say, okay, system user, I think I'm fine. But with the new indirect licensing thing which SAP is doing, they may also ask you and say, okay, let me know how this ID or this interface is being used and where the data from SAP is going in. So they're trying to even ask you to pay if you have an interface for non-SAP system and there are maybe 1,000 users accessing your data. So that's another topic for another day, but just know, like, system ID would be the user ID you should be creating when you create RFC ID, any interface, anything you do. So the password don't expire for the system ID. Nobody can, like, no human being can log in using any like dialog method of going via SAP Logon pad or even going via URL, right? This can only be used for any connection via RFC or anything else, right? The third one, probably I would say communication and the references, they are not used as often now. Again, if you can see, references more like if you're create a reference user, then you can just maintain that in this SU01. So whatever access reference user has, it will also be assigned, or at least the assigned user would have the same access. Again, these are no longer used. It's still there, but if you're working today, you would not be seeing reference user being used in SAP system. Communication data is also similar to the RFCs and everything. Again, I would say they are not actively used. I think I will stick with system and dialog. The last one is service ID, which probably you may see sometime being used, but again, I would recommend not to. For GRC, I think the firefighter ID is created as a service ID. Again, they are not counted for the licensing audit too, but the service ID is kind of a mix of both dialog and system. So they are not for a named account, but their password don't expire as system ID, but they also allow login. So, and it should not be shared, but technically the service ID can be shared because it's allowing you multiple sessions and everything. So again, not the multiple session, maybe that's based on the parameter, but at least, like, if I have a password, I can log in, and then maybe somebody else can also use that and log in, and maybe not on the same time, but they can log in, right? So again, not recommended. I would say stick with your dialog and system ID. Dialog for named account, system ID for your any of the non-named account use case. Okay. So yeah, it's by default, it takes the dialog user type, there's security policy, we can cover that. So you can create a lot of security policies and assign here that kind of control a lot of things, like, okay, your password and everything else. So if you have security policies, you have to pick and choose from here. Then I think you have a password field. So if you're creating a user, you have to put initial password here, whatever you want to, because the user has to change this anyway, right? So yeah, initial password you have to maintain. Then user group is like more like I suppose you have a different team in your company, right? You have a security folks, you have basis folks, you have a BAPR, and you have purchasing, finance, and whatever, right? So it's more like a separate field which lets you kind of do a lot of reporting in the table. So it's more like user master data which help us to kind of on our day-to-day support. So it's highly recommended to maintain user group and kind of make sure this is a correct user group, and so that if somebody say, okay, I want to know my basis user, you can easily just come in and then say, okay, these are our bases. Also, during any maintenance activity where you have to lock and unlock or do whatever, like you can say, okay, exclude my basis users, right, or even my super users, right? So that way, if you have user group assigned correctly, you can just simply exclude them in when you're doing a mass lock or mass unlock. And we'll talk about that mass lock and unlock and the mass user admin T code, which is SU10, in our next video. But just for this one, just know a user group is a field which is again highly recommended to be used. The next field is valid from and valid to. This is more like, okay, if I have a user ID, how long I want that ID to be active. Like if I put like a past day here, they cannot log in. So it should be a present date and the ID should be valid today if somebody is trying to log in and use that ID. So generally for employees, you say, okay, valid from is when they are hired. Valid to is like a 12/31/9999. It's just like unlimited, because employees, there is no end date unless when they are terminated, then you have to come and then you have to lock and disable here and put end date here. But creating a user, yeah, just know it's based on their employee life cycle. So if it's a contractor, consultant, whatever it is, I think they would have some validity in the ADID or the whatever HR system you have. So it should match that whatever you have in your HR system. So again, highly recommended to maintain these two fields as well. Next tab is SNC. SNC is a secure network thing. This is not the other SNC system which SAP has. This is used for securing the communication within SAP and I think how all the things are being done. Also, it's also being used for single sign-on, which is based on Kerberos and the SAP SSO 3.0 solution, right? So if you have SSO, you will have to maintain some parameter here. We can maybe cover that later, but that's like a more deep and more extensive topic, and probably will not have that configured for our test system. But just know SNC is used for encrypting your communication. I think highly recommended to enable SNC. It uses SAP crypto library, and there would be a lot of documents which you can follow to configure it. And then if you also want to have SSO for your SAP system, you would be enabling SNC and then maintaining a parameter for each user. Next field is default field. Again, there are different things here like start menu. So if you notice when we logged in, we saw some menu. I can maybe go back and show, I think once we save this user. So you can give like a standard menu, like different T codes, or if you have a custom start menu, you want to say, okay, I want this user to see different user menu than the others. So you can control that. Again, not heavily used now, but it depends on how your implementation is, right? So if you have something really, you would be maintaining a start menu there as well. And there's a T code for maintaining the menu. Maybe if you know, that can be another interview question. So maybe just do Google and see what the start menu T code is, and maybe put in your comment, and then I can confirm, right? So that's like a question for you while you're watching this video. Logon language, if you want to change the logon language of user other than what the system default logon language is, you can always do that here. So suppose you have a user in China and the system language is default English, right? So you can come here and then choose the specific language, and then once user login, they would see everything in whatever language you selected. Same for decimal notation. I think it's based on if you're in US and Europe, it differs how these are used across, and then the date format, again based on how you're using it, right? So in US is year, month and date, and other places is reverse, right? So based on how you have it, you can maintain this. And then the time format is spool output, or the output device is for printing, right? Suppose you're trying to print something from SAP like your invoice or whatever, right? So you can pick the printer, like local means like whatever printer is connected to the user's laptop. I get error because I don't have a device connected or configured, but yeah, you would add a printer if you want to. And then there's a T code for users to maintain these for themselves. So again, another interview question, and just think about it if you can, otherwise I will just tell you the name. Yeah, the T code is SU3. So every user should have SU3 so that they can maintain these things if they have to. Just the basic ones like my language, my decimal notation, and my output device and everything. Again, you see time zone and then CAT, yeah, right, whatever, so you can change that. I will skip the cat one. This is the ecat, which is used for scripting, so I'm not gonna go there. Next one is parameter. SAP has a lot of parameters like company code, whatever, like, so you want to maintain few parameters by default for each user, right? So you would do that here. So generally you will have few parameters which should be assigned to everybody, whether it's a Excel output or some variant or whatever, some layout thing, right? So this is where you will maintain the parameter, then you will maintain the value here. The next tab is the most important tab, I would say, for a user, like assigning the right roles. So that is where, suppose you have a security user, you have to assign the role which is created for security. Your basis, you would assign the basis. So this is where you would assign the right roles which was created for the specific user or whatever job or team he belongs to. So you will just come in here, you would type whatever role you have. We talk about role admin detail in later, but a role, SAP deliver a lot of standard roles, but we copy or we build our own roles when we do implement SAP. This is the thing you would do when you implement SAP for any company or customer, right? So you want to build a role based on least privileges and based on the business requirements. So suppose I have a mapping, I'm going to assign some role here, right? And once you assign it, then yeah, once you save it and the user can log in, and then he or she can run those T codes which are part of the role you just assigned, right? So the user gets created, user has ID and password, they get assigned the roles, and roles have authorization of T codes and authorization objects and different values or org values, right? So this is where you can build role RBAC, a role-based access control, making sure you only give what you're supposed to give and not more than that. But yeah, this is the most critical field, I would say, for user, right? The next one is profile. This is again, it goes back to the old word when we have SAP 3.1 and even the earlier, like we didn't have a role, we only had profiles. So the first profile, which probably you should know for your interview, is SAP_all and SAP_new. Again, this is like everything. This is like God mode, right? So you should not be assigning these to anybody in production, but maybe when doing a system build, your basis probably would have these, because you don't even have a role to assign to your basis folks, right? So this is all, anybody having SAP or SAP new can do anything in your system, in your SAP system. So please make sure you don't assign these in your system. You build proper roles, even though you can build like a trimmed down version of SAP all if it's needed, but this is like first thing any auditor would be asking, like, tell me if anybody have SAP all and SAP new in your system. So I'm just assigning you, showing just for example, but make sure you not assign these even to you or even to anybody, right? So yeah, but every role you build also have a profile attached to it. So when you assign these roles on the first and the tab item we just talk about it, you're gonna see even their profile's name assigned here. So that's how it works. Roles contains profiles, those are actually authorization objects, and then plus T code becomes role. So role is like role equal to profiles plus T code. So it just on a layman term, but they are not being assigned directly anymore. They come via assigning role. But we have some standard profiles, as I just showed, SAP_all and SAP_new, but never assign those unless it's like sandbox or you're building new system and so you still haven't built your roles and it's for initial phase only, right? Groups, again, the groups we talked about, I think this is similar. I think you can assign some user groups here, and yeah, sometimes they are being used for some other T-code and purposes. And then there are other personalization where again UI2 or whatever it is, I will skip that one too. And then the licensing is where you will assign the actual license type to the user, like, okay, this user is my manager, developer access, a professional user, whatever, only basis users, right? Whatever. So this is how you would work with SAP to get licenses and then different categories, and you would see only once if you enable only 3 or 4. You're supposed to only have 4 type of users, right? Licenses of users, and your charge based on whatever contract you have with SAP. So make sure you assign these as per what user is doing and how your definition of those users types are. Suppose it's HR user, you would assign HR user license. If it's a workbench developer user, you would assign that, right? So it's based on the what role and what access they have, right? And then you're gonna just click on save. It's gonna create the user ID. So this is in short, I would say, a brief demo of using SU01, creating user ID, and same you can click on change. It will let you change the same things you did, or you want to display. If you're not trying, if you're in production, I would always use the display one. Don't just directly go to the change one. If you're deleting is not recommended unless it's a test system or test user. We should always disable and log the user, and then maybe deleting them maybe after some time, right? Like, because with SAP user, a lot of things are linked with user. Like if the user has done a lot of transactions, right? So if you delete the user, you may not be able to kind of go back and say, okay, who this user was, right? So disable the user, make sure it's logged, it has a valid end to date, so that it's not counted against your licenses. But keeping them there is not gonna charge you cost any money. Maybe you can do cleanup after year of and the user has been disabled, or 6 months, or whatever your policy or control have, right? This log unlock thing is lets you both do unlock and lock, and based on if it's locked then it will unlock, if it's unlocked then it will lock, right? And then this one, it would give you a screen where you can just simply put initial password again and then save it, right? So suppose somebody would say, okay, I forgot my password, I cannot log in. You would get a ticket there, right? So you would come here and then you would set up initial password and then ask them to log in. Again, don't share those initial password by email or whatever. Like, try to find a better way of communicating which is more secure and encrypted, right? So this was a brief of, I would say, SU01 demo. I would say demo of SU01. I hope you like it, and we're going to talk about further T courses. So I will see you in the next lecture, next topic. Till then, take care and happy learning. Bye.